In that scene, we ran a number of passes on him with different kinds of lights. And in the compositing, we mixed all those lights together to actually get the final look. So you'll notice on Hein that he has a very sort of purpley blue light coming from the sort of camera direction. And then he has a very hard sort of key light on the side of his face. To accentuate that key light and accentuate, I guess, the tension in the sequence, we actually added a little glow off that key light to make it look very lonely and sort of a very, very stark situation. I'm James Rogers. I'm compositing supervisor for Final Fantasy. Compositing, I guess, is when you start to put the layers of images together. When you talk about compositing, I guess it's important to know a few of the other terms that we use and processes that happen before we actually get to the compositing. The most important thing is rendering. And when you build something in 3D or you're making like a 3D movie, you actually have to end up with images at the end. 3D stuff, and probably everyone's seen wireframes and sort of the very basic rudimentary parts of 3D. But as it progresses through, it gets textures applied to it, which is basically like putting skin on a human or putting bricks on a wall or something like that. And then after you've finished lighting it, you can do this process called rendering. And rendering is basically like taking a picture of the 3D model and telling the computer, this is the way the camera's pointing, I want you to take a picture of this. And because we're making a motion picture, we need to take a lot of pictures. Because we're working with so much data, the information we're working with is so huge on this movie, we can't render everything at once. We actually have to render it in parts. So what we'll do is we'll render a wall, and then we'll render a character, and then we'll render the chair and the table. And in compositing, we take all those layers and we actually put them all together to make them look like one. We have a sequence called AAA, which is a code name that we use to classify all the sequences, and that's Aki's adventure sequence. And in that sequence, she actually lands the boa in Times Square, and she comes down in her sort of boa lift, and the camera moves all the way up to her face. I guess it's a pretty good example of what we might do in compositing. Now in that shot, we actually rendered Aki herself. Then we rendered the boa lift, which is actually the platform she stands on. We rendered the boa itself, which you can see on the top left-hand side of the frame. And we also rendered the background. The other things that we needed to add to that was a lot of dust and fog. You needed to add Aki's cone light, which is the light that comes off the top of her head. And actually in the background of that scene, there's a lot of billboards. And the original billboards that were put in there were actual billboards from Times Square. We replaced those with a few images of our crew members and colleagues. There's a fellow you can see in some of the scenes wearing a large pink wig, which is actually Cameron Stedman, who was the production supervisor.
We have actually one of the most amazing sound designers, Randy Tom, who works for Bob Zemeckis. It's a treat to work with somebody that understands sound so well, and he's designing everything from the phantoms to the engines. Because the fact is that Sakuchi-san wants this film to sound like no other film. He wants a unique sound for this movie.
My name is Randy Tom, and I'm the sound designer on Final Fantasy. One of the great things about working on an animated film as opposed to a live-action film is you get to create a whole world. On a live-action film, you are handed some sound that was gathered on the set, and you're sort of stuck with that in a way. You have to deal with that, whereas in an animated film, you have free hand to do all kinds of creative things, really create a whole world. One of the big challenges with Final Fantasy is that we have these phantoms, these ghost-like spiritual creatures. Sometimes they are frightening. Sometimes they're like lost souls. Sometimes we need to create voices that are gonna just scare the heck out of you. Other times we want the phantoms to sound mystical and transcendental and, if not friendly, at least not intimidating. I used all kinds of wild animal sounds. I'm using some combination of big cats, like tigers and lions. occasionally bears, often myself. But we take a recording like that and we slow it down so that it sounds like I'm 30 or 40 feet tall instead of 6 feet tall.
My name is Elliot Goldenthal, and on this movie I've composed the score music as well as an end credit song. The London Symphony Orchestra recorded the score. It was a joy working with them. It's so amazing. The first time they play it, they get it all right. The second time, it sounds like they've rehearsed it for 2 days. And the third time, it's like you're at a concert hall and they've been touring it. You know, it's remarkable. When Aki, our heroine in the movie, focuses on what she calls Gaia, or the Earth Soul, in the music I use something that's extremely familiar with the closest human kind of instrument, like a flute. I had ghostly sort of choral things when you see the phantoms sort of merge on screen before you see them totally, so it has this celestial quality to it. When things are very, very violent, I tend to use low brass clusters and Japanese taiko drums playing these very, very absolutely ferocious rhythms. Also, there's a scene where she talks about a death of a little girl.
The fifth was a little girl.
Although it's a foreign environment, I chose to use a piano to express what I think is a feeling of home. Because when you think of the home, quite often a lot of people have a little spinet piano. They took piano lessons. The connotation then is that this is a very familial, domestic thing, even though we couldn't be in a more undomestic place.
She said I didn't have to make up stories to make her feel better.
So those are the choices that composers make, subconsciously or consciously.
And ready to die.
The one thing I was most happy with was the last scene, where Aki holds Gray and is climbing out of the valley. What more can be said, as she is desperately burdened by Gray in the morning sun, and sees the hawk, the symbol of life. In an instant, a stillness arrives. After that, it's Elliot's music, which is the film's theme. From the start, I wanted this theme song to accompany Aki's gaze as she sees the hawk gliding. But in the end, the way these two elements blended was far better than I could have expected.
It's not so much an episode of entertainment. It's just like a mythical journey.
Watching this movie is like watching a constant piece of art, the most beautiful piece of art.
I was just blown away by the style. There's a great style to this.
It's imagery that's never been seen before. It's amazing. It truly is amazing.
The film is telling us there is another way of looking. It's an entirely new experiment.
Final Fantasy is a cinematic first. It's going to hold its place in history as the first ever attempted computer-generated humans.
It's so much grander and just more extraordinary in every way than what I had had in my head.
We created visuals that until now have never been seen.
This is a whole other level of animation, where besides the hair, I mean, just the liquid in the eyes, it's unbelievable.
You sometimes get caught out and forget that you're watching animation.
I've never seen an audience mesmerized like I've seen audiences with this film. I was amazed.
So I think it's going to be a lot bigger than any of us know.
Go! James! Get the hell out of there!
Blast you off to hell.